Okay, tonight I'm going to talk about Bushwick in the 2010s because it actually played a really important role in a lot of the things that we're talking about in uh, that we're talking about that were going on in Brooklyn in the 2010s. Okay, because especially Bushwick in the last decade in the 2010s was kind of like what Williamsburg was in the first decade of the century. Okay, so Bushwick was like the Williamsburg of the 2010s. All right, it was where a lot of innovation was going on, a lot of new people were moving in. It wasn't completely gentrified, it wasn't completely safe, still retained a lot of its old character. So there's a lot to talk about there. All right, so first, Bushwick. Where is it? It's very close to Williamsburg. It is in kind of straddles North Brooklyn down to central Brooklyn, you could say. So it borders Bedford-Stuyvesant, it borders Williamsburg, and then on the other end, it goes all the way down to, I believe, Cypress Hills and close to East New York. Okay, so it's an extensive area, all right, and from a little history, from everything I've heard about it, from anyone who was there before 2000, that it was a dangerous place. It was sounded like it was poor, it was dangerous. People told me the hospital Woodhull, which is kind of like on the border of Bushwick and Bed-Stuy, was a place you didn't want to be. I heard especially the area around Flushing Avenue and Bushwick Avenue was really bad. Somebody even told me he didn't want to drive down there. So universally, the impression I got of Bushwick through the 70s, 80s, and 90s was that it was a dangerous place, and it seems like it had a lot of poverty, a lot of problems. Okay, so I first encountered it around 2010 when I was going to the Third Ward, which, as I've mentioned in other videos, was this place. It was kind of like a community center / school for a lot of the young people who were pursuing things in North Brooklyn at that time. So the Third Ward was on Morgan Avenue, it was off Morgan Avenue and Van Eyck. And there was some controversy at the time. This area was called East Williamsburg. Other people said it was part of Bushwick, that the whole East Williamsburg thing was just made up by real estate agents who were fearful that people would stay away from there if they thought of it as Bushwick, because Bushwick still had a reputation that had carried over from earlier days. So that was the part of Bushwick I first got to know. It was pretty industrial over there. It was actually called that East Williamsburg. I believe it was called the East Williamsburg Industrial Park. There were still a lot of light industry over there, warehouses, wood shops. Not too many restaurants or things like that at that time. There were like yards for trucking companies. It was it was an industrial area. That was what I first got to know. Just a lot of the industry you'd see these, big trucks like having to, back into this very narrow garage. It was crazy. And then there was like the canal over there that separated Brooklyn from Queens, and I remember there was like this big boat that was always sitting there, and I think there were parties that would go on, and I was getting out of it, too old for it at the time, but yeah, I would hear about a lot of like kind of underground parties, raves going on at that time. And actually, there were a few times where I would be going to work in that area in the morning and would see people coming out of parties 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning. So there was some of that going on in the industrial area. Later on, I got to know the area around Knickerbocker Avenue, which was a big commercial area of Bushwick. And there you would have a lot of like discount stores. It was more residential over there. You had a really big immigrant community of Hispanics, especially. They had a lot of restaurants, a lot of stores, a lot of businesses. There was Maria Hernandez Park, which was a fairly big park. I used to go jogging there sometimes. And yeah, you would see just a mix of people there, especially a lot of Hispanics. So that was kind of what I first saw of Bushwick at that time, around 2010, 2011. Now, what you had going on at that time was where a lot of people were feeling Williamsburg was no longer what it had been, kind of like a haven for artists, for younger people fresh out of college from elsewhere in the country looking to make their mark in New York City. Williamsburg had become more of a professional class, had become more expensive. The fancier buildings were starting to go up all over the place. Huge development. The businesses that were there were catering to a class of people with more money. So the writing was on the wall. So kind of the people the younger people who were pursuing something, especially in the arts, were beginning to migrate over to Bushwick, which was a neighborhood nearby, and still had access to good transportation. Like the L train still passed through Bushwick, and this train would take you to Williamsburg or to Manhattan. So it was well suited for that. So throughout the 2010, started to see more and more of these people were moving in there, and over time, throughout the decade, you would see them mixed in with the general Hispanic or black population that had been living there for several decades or had moved from Peru or Guatemala or other parts of Central and South America. So it was really a big mix in Bushwick throughout the decade of people there from really varying backgrounds, and a lot of the people who were moving into Bushwick would fit into the hipster classification that I mentioned in another video. If you want more of an analysis of that, check out my video, which is devoted to talking about the hipster and what it was. So they would stand out, and you would see really this mix of kind of generally white and people with kind of with thrift store clothes and dyed hair, mixed with Hispanic families walking along the same streets. And and gradually the hipster or gentrifiers, I don't know if I like that word, but the people who were moving in throughout the decade, along with the immigrants, they were changing the character. The more businesses catered to them, There was restaurants that catered to them. There was Champ's Diner moved into that area, which was a vegan diner. You could get just diner food for vegans. I remember there was a venue for uh, punk rock shows, which was in that East Williamsburg area. It was Newberry. I can't remember exactly the name, but that was there. Music studios where you'd see people, with guitars on their backs going to music studios to practice. There was this place, Shea Stadium. I remember it was kind of like an underground music venue. Bushwick, it became that kind of place, and you got people there who were, moving in with roommates, doing what it took to live in New York City. They try to, get into some off. At first, it was old apartments, maybe 100 years old or something, and 3 or 4 people, maybe they didn't even know each other, maybe they were from the same town or something, and they're getting together and they're trying to live out that dream. And gradually throughout the decade started to see newer apartment blocks going up, and a lot of the similar patterns that you saw in Williamsburg were going on, but never to the same extent. Bushwick, throughout the decade, it kind of coexisted with what had been there before, with the older residents, the Hispanic, Puerto Rican, Central American residents. It's not like it changed over completely in a lot of the ways that Williamsburg did, or especially you could say Hispanic or Italian Williamsburg did, where just this really huge change. It did change a lot, but it wasn't like by the end of the decade that the character of Bushwick had been completely erased. If you went to Maria Hernandez Park, you were still very likely to hear Spanish and to see businesses that catered to Hispanic communities, where you could get tamales and empanadas and those kinds of things. So there was a real mix there, and people were doing a lot of things, and that was where I left off with Bushwick by the end of the decade. Just kind of where it had become this place that was still kind of seen as somewhat of a haven for people pursuing the arts, for pursuing cooking, chefs, things like that, working in entertainment, just trying to stay in New York City with a hope and a dream, and coexisting with what had been there before. So that was Bushwick. What else can I say about it? It's not a pretty place. I can definitely say that about Bushwick. I remember when I first went there, I'm like, this place just is a lot of concrete, a lot of apartment blocks. There were some parks, like I said, like Maria Hernandez. Like I like to go there. There's another one. The name escapes me. A couple of parks, but overall, just not a very beautiful place, and certainly never became as nice looking a place as Williamsburg. And maybe that's why it didn't change as much as Williamsburg. It's inner city. That's what it was. And I wouldn't be surprised if there was still, generally a higher than average amount of crime going on there. I don't know exactly, but it certainly was not, from everything I heard from people who had been there before, was certainly not as dangerous as it had been. So, check it out. It's a place to see. The people go there, they check out their graffiti. There's great graffiti artists over there, and they just do their thing. You got skateboarders, Bushwick Open Studios, things like that. So check it out sometime. It's a lot of what I said by 2020. I mean, it's still probably like that. So that's it. I'll be exploring other neighborhoods, other aspects of Brooklyn in the 2010s. Look for my other videos, look for the links below, and we'll go on with it. Okay.